Welcome to the Church of Love, a podcast hosted by myself, Jyoti, along with co-hosts Swami Swahananda Saraswati and Reverend Rachel Schwab. The show is produced by Freedom Media, LLC. Church of Love will explore the changing dynamic of spirituality worldwide and the common belief that God is, in whatever shape he, she, it takes, the essence of love. We hope to remind you that you are love and are loved. So sit back, relax, and join us at the Church of Love.
This week on Church of Love, we are joined by Rabbi Rami Shapiro to discuss rewilding your spiritual heart. Rabbi Rami earned rabbinic ordination from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in 1981, and a PhD in religion from Union Graduate School in 1985. Over the past 40 years, he's been a USAF chaplain, a congregational rabbi, a business consultant, a university professor, and an author of 36 books on religion and spirituality. In 2010, he was initiated into the Ramakrishna order of Vedanta Hinduism by Swami Swahananda and became a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. Several years later, he founded the Order of the Holy Rascal and joined another secret society, the Grand Lodge of All Beings. He is the co-director of the One River Foundation, wrote the Roadside Assistance for the Spiritual Traveler column for the Spirituality and Health magazine, and hosts the magazine's podcast, Essential Conversations with Rabbi Rami. Rabbi Rami, thank you so much for being here with us.
It's my pleasure. It's going to be fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyone that belongs to the Order of the Holy Rascal, you know, this is like, poised to be a good podcast.
Exactly. I mean, to start off, I am so grateful to have a kindred spirit. I mean, pretty much, I think a few of the books that I have been drawn to by you, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, you're actually saying what I've been thinking for years since I was a child. And just being able to articulate that as a young person in ministry many years ago, although I've been in this ministry now for 20 years, but I'm just so grateful for someone else who sees the commonalities in our traditions and experiences of the spiritual life. And as a result, or as a part of the process, you have created a heart for embracing this unity of our traditions and the elements that we have in common with one another. And so the first very important question that we all, the three of us, have discussed and really want to know is, what is a holy rascal? And how can we hop on that train? Because we are ready.
So a holy rascal is someone who refuses to give up on religion and who at the same time thinks that organized religion is absolutely, with all due respect to those of you in a church, is really at the heart of our problem. That what I call organized religion, I call it big religion, like big pharma, big agra. These are huge institutions that are really all about patriarchy, power, and money. And the things that they teach are in service to the people in power and not in service to the people in the pews. So a holy rascal is someone who wants to say a couple of things. One, the emperor has no clothes. That the claims that clergy make are just made up claims that clergy make about themselves. Or to put it another way, in the Order of the Holy Rascal, our mascot is Dorothy's dog, Toto. The Wizard of Oz. The wizard is speaking, the great and terrible wizard, and Toto goes and starts to pull the curtain back on the wizard to reveal the little man with the huge megaphone. That's what holy rascals do. We're Toto. We pull the curtain back to reveal what's really happening on the organizational level. At the same time, we celebrate what I call the perennial wisdom at the mystic heart of every religion. Mm-hmm. So holy rascals aren't anti-religion, they're anti the craziness of religion and pro the heart of it. So if you give me 2 seconds more, I'll just lay it out. Perennial wisdom has 4 points. The first point is everything in existence is a manifesting of a single reality. You can call it God, you can call it Brahma, you can call it Tao, nature, mother, right? Anything you want. In Hebrew, the word I like best is chiyut, which means aliveness. Every living thing is a manifesting of a single aliveness. Point number 2 is that you and I, human beings in general, have an innate capacity to awaken to that aliveness. Without clergy, without religion, without dogma, through direct, I would say contemplative practice. You may need a teacher to teach you a meditation system, a chanting system, yoga, but it's also, as my friend, now deceased, but my friend and teacher, Father Thomas Keating used to say, you can get it from gardening, you can get it from, different things. So the first is we're all part of the same reality. The second is we can know this directly, know this reality directly. The third one is when you know it directly, you can only act with love. It's not a commandment. It's your only option. It's what Krishnamurti calls choiceless awareness. So the way we normally put it is when you're awake to the aliveness in, with, and as all things, you feel an internal obligation to live according to the golden rule, if you like to put it that way, or in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verse 3, it says that our calling as humans is to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. And then the fourth and final point of perennial wisdom is awakening to aliveness and being a blessing is the highest thing that human beings can do. That's why we're here. And that's it. I think if you go to any mystic tradition, within or without a religion, but I'm thinking mostly within, if you go to the mystic heart of any religion, you bypass the patriarchy, you get rid of all the craziness, and you come to these same 4 points, each one articulated in its own unique cultural setting, but all of them making the same, leading in the same direction, making the same, articulating the same truths.
It reminds me, I listened to a TED talk you did recently. It came up on my feed, sort of, it's like the beings of Google know exactly what I like. Something came up and it was you. Here we were just talking about, we're going to have Rabbi Rami, and then it just like appeared on my YouTube. And there you were doing a TED talk on aliveness, and you were talking about this. And I love that you, during that whole interactive TED talk with I was going to say congregation, with the audience, you offered a beautiful, like a little meditative chant. You were talking about someone that was at the bedside, and you were offering this sort of a meditation on aliveness. I was wondering if you could share that with us.
Okay, you're going to have to. What we did at the TED Talk was we chanted this. If that's what you're talking about,
yes.
This Hasidic, you want me to chant? You want to hear it?
Yes,
Is that it?
Sure, yes.
So this comes from the 1800s. It's a rabbi, his name escapes me at the moment. He was called the Chernobyl Rebbe. Rebbe is the next step up from rabbis, like guru. And he's called the Chernobyl Rebbe. He lived in Chernobyl. And this is what he taught. I'm going to do it in English. He did it in Yiddish, probably. But it goes like this. I am alive. I am alive. I am alive. I'm alive. And who is this aliveness I am? And who is this aliveness I am? And who is this aliveness I am? If not the holy blessed one. And then it just repeats over and over again.
Oh,
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
But thank you. My singing's not so great.
I have a beautiful chanting voice.
Well, thank you.
Voice.
The translation is by Rabbi David Zeller. And what I love about it is it starts with the affirmation of you being alive. I mean, the four of us, and then everyone who's, watching this, we're each a unique expression of the non-dual aliveness. So you have to start with that. I mean, you're not me. I'm not you. I'm a unique manifesting of this thing. But then he says, but who is this aliveness? I didn't make myself. So what is this deeper reality? And to me, it's like Ramana Maharshi in his meditation, where he says, ask yourself, who's thinking this? Who am I? Who's experiencing this at the moment? And you realize that the answer to that question, not just intellectually, but on a visceral level, is this aliveness. So, I mean, I don't know how much you want me to talk. It's supposed to have dialogue, but I'll tell you, if it's okay, you can edit it out. I have one living teacher left in my life, a wonderful Indian man named Prasanna. He's not in any system. He's in the lineage of Ramana Maharshi. He's in his mid-80s, so he's way up there. And the last time I went to see him, we were sitting in his living room. He has a small one-bedroom apartment. And anyway, we're sitting in his house and we're just talking, which is all he does. We're just chatting. And then he asks me a stupid question. And the question is, so what's your spiritual practice? And it's a stupid question because he taught me the spiritual practice. So I don't know what he was saying. So I said, well, I do what you told me. I do what Ramana called self-inquiry. And I ask myself periodically, who am I? And then he says, and he's this very beautiful, small Indian man. And he says, are you? And I don't know what happened, but I wasn't. Who am I? I say that. And then he goes, are you? And I can't say anything about it because I wasn't there at the moment. But then I came back and I still couldn't speak. I was absolutely, literally incapable of forming a coherent thought and then translating that into words, into language, vocalizing it. Instead, I was just aware. Now, I'm not making some enlightenment, claim here, but I was clearly conscious, but not self-conscious. And so I couldn't say anything. And that eventually passed and we had a conversation about that, but he didn't want to talk about it. He just said, oh, well, whatever. So this aliveness is what you and I have in common. I mean, you and I, and, I'm looking at, Jyoti's garden behind her, little on her shelves, her plants. I mean, you and I, and all of the green and all things that we think of as living, but also the inanimate objects. I mean, it's all the same stuff, it's all from the same reality. So we can experience that directly. And when you do, you can only feel love for and from everything. I mean, that's why I guess you call it the Church of Love.
Wow. It's just such an honor to have you here to speak and to share your wisdom with us. And just based on what you said, my mind is going off in so many different directions. Some of what you're saying, especially about the Holy Rascals, is reminding me of Ganesha, the Lord of the Ganas, one of the heavenly mischievous ones. Yeah, so he kind of reminds me also of, the Toto, the one who pulls back the curtain.
Right.
And when you're speaking of the Dharma of our existence, and I'm called to remembering a quote which from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna tells Arjuna, there comes a time where you need to stop the childish behavior. And in talking about the obligation that we come to as our hearts awaken, it's almost like we recognize that these other behaviors are futile. They're not going to bring us what it is that we want. They're not going to give us what it is that our heart's longing for. And so we really have no choice other than to align with the essence and the energy of love, because it's the only place where happiness truly abides.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say to Reverend Rachel, It's just like when St. Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child.
Exactly.
It's the same idea. The problem with much of what I call big religion is it's childish,
Exactly.
and it still gets us, it tries to get us to stay stuck as six-year-olds. You know, this is, let me scare you with stuff and make you do what I tell you to do.
Oh,
This is why I love this
Wonderful
church
book.
right here. This is the church right here.
Mhm. Well, in your wonderful book, and I'm just going to hold it up here, as I mentioned before, when I picked this up, I could not put it back down again. It's just such a beautiful compilation of thoughts, ideas, scriptures, reflections, the divine feminine and biblical wisdom literature. You quote Ecclesiastes 1:8-11, and I'm just going to state it.
Okay, good, because I can't.
The eye never tires of seeing, nor the ear of hearing. The future imitates the past. Time is not a line, but a circle. There is nothing new beneath the sun. For what seems new now is but the old forgotten, and what will seem new tomorrow is but today unremembered. And so my question to you surrounding this, and it kind of falls in line with what you've already been saying, but to ask you to elaborate, why does the eye never tire of seeing nor the ear of hearing? Is it because the truth resonates so deeply within us that our hearts are constantly wilding us toward reveling in that truth? Or is it that there is so much to be known about God's almighty creation and wisdom that the diversity of which is overwhelming, that we're somehow trying to fill ourselves up enough to know God through the magnitude of what can be seen or heard or experienced within the physical world? Or the third one, is it in some part the ego, asking us to know through the physical that which is only knowable through the subtle energies of love, faith, and surrender?
So I would say D, all of the above. I think there's truth in all three of those options. The only, we could go through them one at a time if you want, but let's just take the last one, the third one, about ego. So I think we have to be careful not to denigrate the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Father Thomas Keating and I, as much as I loved, shouldn't put it in the past tense, as much as I loved the man, he would talk about the false self. And then I would always raise my hand and say, you know, and he knew, and it was like, okay, go ahead, get it off your chest. And I would say the ego isn't false. It's just not the whole story. So in Judaism, we have the term mochin de katnut, narrow mind, and mochin de gadlut, spacious mind. But you need narrow mind to function. In the Talmud, the rabbis say you need narrow mind in order to fall in love and to have a family and to run a business and, you know, to do all the things that you do as your own, you know, as yourself. But if that's all you have, then you're in trouble. So I don't want to denigrate the ego, but I like what you said. There's no but there. And I like what you said about seeing the divine in the physicality. Job says somewhere, can't quote you chapter and verse, but Job says somewhere near the end, I think, chapter 42, maybe chapter 40, in my flesh, I see God.
Mm.
You know, that's so cool. It's not an abstraction, right? The divine. There is no real absolute difference between the spiritual and the physical. My very physicality is this divine happening. So, you know, I wrote a sequel to the Divine Feminine book called Embracing the Divine Feminine. And it's a mystical look at the Song of Songs. And there's a chapter in Song of Songs, I think it's chapter 7. The problem with me is I write the book and then I forget the book. So, but I think it's chapter 7, which is actually some kind of erotic practice for between two lovers, moving up the body and like raising the kundalini, but doing it physically in a sexual way, to achieve some kind of orgastic release that is part of an awakening process. So the flesh is not the problem. religions that denigrate the flesh, they're a problem. But the
Mhm.
flesh isn't the problem. Sex isn't the problem. Even the ego isn't the problem. The problem is when we think any one of these things is it or not it, as opposed to realizing those are just three examples of an infinitely creative manifesting.
Mhm.
So it's, all three of those. I like the idea. I think in the original, when I do these translations, they're all interpretive. I imagine that whoever wrote Ecclesiastes, because that's not a person's name, it's a title, the teacher. So whoever wrote the book may have thought it's exhausting to just keep seeing new stuff and to hearing new things. But that's not how I read it at all. I mean, just imagine if you didn't see anything new, you were just watching reruns, which, when we're at home in COVID, if you're streaming old shows, watching reruns all the time, or, hearing the same things. I imagine he thought, how tiresome. But I don't think it's that way at all. I don't think it's each time you see something, it's like the first time, and each time you hear something, it's the first time. So I think it's a celebration of our physicality as a vehicle for for spiritual awakening.
Wow. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes. And I do agree. And I feel that I am in 100% agreement. The ego is not the problem. The issue is that our sight is short and we're willing to accept a partial truth as the entire truth, which is in large part why there's so much suffering in this world today. Is because, each individual person thinks that they have the answer. And even though, the answer is actually much larger than any one of us.
Yeah. So Swamini, correct me if I'm screwing this up, but in what I know about Hinduism, the problem is ignorance, avidya, right? It's just we're ignorant. And Alan Watts has this, doesn't work in Sanskrit, but it's clever in English. He says ignorance is the capacity to ignore the big picture. And that's our problem. We just focus in on this little bit and think, that's it. And we just don't put things in perspective. So we end up with these binaries and this zero-sum worldview, which pits, men against women, trans against cis, black against white. You name it, Jew against non-Jew. Just all of those things. I'm sure I got in trouble because mentioning some of them, but that's what our ignorance does. And even trying to fix those things, the language, we're so attached to the language that on some level, it perpetuates the ignorance and the problem. Because in the end, I think you end up with, even though I can honor, respect, see, and celebrate each person's uniqueness, in that moment of awakening, all that stuff drops away, and there's just this happening. And then the uniqueness comes back into play. But at that moment of awakening, my guess is there's just, Sat Chit Ananda, pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss. And that's different than, non-differentiation. It's a different thing. Of course, if you say it's different, it's differentiation, but it's another dimension. Now I'm stuck. See, the language is our problem. I'm done.
But it is. Isn't that the truth, though? Isn't that the truth? Because
the language is the problem.
Language is the problem because the only pure vibration is Om. Everything else is only a fraction of a truth. And it seems like even through our vocabulary, we're constantly trying to get back to that completeness, to that Purna, to the wholeness of Om. But even the words that we're speaking right now will only ever carry a very, very tiny piece of that. So I always suggest to people, so instead of having full-blown conversations, we should just chant Om together. And then we'll be in the truth. That's all.
So let me ask the three of you a question. I know that I'm supposed to be answering, but I don't care.
That's okay. Turn the tables on us.
Well, I love this idea of Om, right, as this primal sound. So in the Bible, so Rachel, in the Bible, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or in the Hebrew Bible, there's this, Elijah has this experience of Kol Damama Dakat, the still small voice, I think King James talks about it. But it's this, the subtle hum of the universe is what I think it is. And he hears in that voice a question. His experience of that voice is a question: why are you here? And then he responds to the question from his ego. And he just repeats what he said literally a couple of verses earlier. And it's all his own drama. It's the stuff you tell your therapist. He doesn't get anywhere in that experience. But hearing the Om, or this voice of silence, the sound of silence, in my own meditation practice, so this is a question to see if anyone has this, or if I'm just having some kind of, biological problem here. But in my own listening practice, I hear, well, it's very hard to describe. I shouldn't even brought it up. There's a kind of soft white noise that isn't coming from outside my head. It's something else. Now, I've been told from teachers in various traditions, in India, it's called nada yoga, sound yoga, and that there is this primal sound, and Om is one way to express it. And I'm happy to chant Om. I love chanting in Sanskrit. But what I hear in the silence of my meditation is something else. And I take refuge in that sound as a way of just centering continually. I might have a complicated meditation practice, but when I notice it, it's like, it's like, oh yeah, settle into that. So Jyoti, have you ever heard of Nada Yoga or Swamini?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was last year in particular. I was with one of my teachers from India in Austria. And so I was going to miss one of his trainings on Nada Yoga because I'd been interested, and I'd taken some classes at Oxford Hindu studies. Anyway, he told me a little bit, but then he's just like, write it down. Don't ever talk about it ever again. Sure. So I have an area in my notebook of what he had told me. But that weekend, though, to give you an example, we were going through the different elements, and when you get to the element of air and ether, that's where Nada Yoga starts to become a predominant part of the teaching, and so we were doing some of the almost like a buzzing sound. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, pranayama.
Soft, right?
Very soft, yeah. And so it was the night before that day we were doing that, and I was doing my mantras for the next day, and in the morning I sat down. I'm allergic to bees. I sat down, and then there was a bee that came right next to me in the morning, and I was outside. It was this beautiful temple, gorgeous on the hill, the mountains, this beautiful bee right next to me, and the bee's just going around me buzzing. And I went, okay. So after the bee finally had been there quite a while, I was like, well, I'm not scared. I'm just gonna be here. And then I decided then to go around to the front of the monastery and then sit there. And then another bee, it was a baby bee this time, that came and was all around me. And I went, well, isn't this interesting? And we went into class, and about, 5-10 minutes into class, all of a sudden there was a yellow jacket that came right next to me. And I went, well, I can either get up and potentially get stung, or I'm just going to sit here and meditate with this process. And the sound of the bee eventually became like that white noise you're talking in the background. And after the class, the teacher had said, she goes, I was so worried about you. She goes, because I was watching the bee then proceeded to start to crawl all over your face and your neck and go inside of your clothes and around your scarf. And I had no awareness of that. And I guess I like to believe that in that space, that meditation space, the bee recognized something. We shared a moment, right?
Yeah.
And we were alive and in that awareness.
Yeah.
Be here now.
Precisely.
There you go.
And thank you, Jyoti, for sharing that. It's such a beautiful reflection. I think there's so much that can be added and talked about. But I think that the one simple thing that I'll just say is that in my humble opinion, as human beings, we have this tendency to really want to amplify or over-exaggerate something because we think the over-exaggeration of the thing is what will help us to understand it more profoundly, more quickly, more usefully. And so we might have a tendency to come into the Brahmari pranayama with the loudness of the humming bee breath or something similar to that. But once the window opens, once there's a little bit of an opportunity to kind of leave what is childish behind and to come into the mature relationship of knowing that which you are part of, that which you are experiencing, but also that which you are part of, then you have that experience of oneness with the bee. Then when your guru says to you, are you really? Now all of a sudden, the loudness, the screaming voice within that says, I want to understand, becomes a silence. And in that silence, it's almost as if that primordial vibration becomes, I'm going to use the word fuzz. It's a movement, it's a feeling, it's something that you're part of. It's not something that's separate from you. It's like you are the cloud, you are the mist, you are the bee. And that truth is so beautiful. And so I do feel all of the practices within yoga are in their own way, depending upon what our temperament is. Their purpose is to bring us toward that understanding, because it's only when we get to that place where we're at least open to the idea of oneness, this idea of a subtle oneness, where you are the bee. You don't have to swat the bee. You don't have to step on the spider. You don't have to hate your neighbor. You don't have to fear your enemy. When we get to that place where we can tune into something other than our fear, then what we are tuning into is that nada. And the gift of that nada is peace. The gift of the nada is unity. Yeah. I'll stop there because we could talk.
Well, if it, so we're just talking. So I have another question, and this is just things that I brought up the nada because I'm into that. You held up, and you might want to do it again. You held up the divine feminine in biblical wisdom literature. Right? There we go. Yeah, see, there. Oh, fantastic. You ever watch television and they're interviewing people who have written books, and their background is their books with the cover out? It's like, that's so, either that's brilliant or it annoys me. So I don't, obviously I've got a lot of things you can look at behind me, but none of them are my books. But I write about the divine feminine and wisdom literature in the Jewish tradition because I experience the Divine Mother as my, and I don't know if I'm getting this right, but Ishwara, my personal deity, right? So, this started happening to me a long time ago, just experiencing her after I had rejected the whole notion of any kind of God, other than the aliveness, but no anthropomorphic God. And I went to my friend Andrew Harvey, who's a devotee of the Divine Mother in many forms. And I said, how do I get rid of this? And he helped me understand that if I'm truly a non-dualist, then there's nothing outside this reality. So I can experience the divine as, Sanskrit's got better language for this than other traditions. So, of course, Nirguna Brahma, so that without form, right? And then Sadgunam, right? Sadguna Brahman.
Yes.
So you get without form and with form. Did I get that right, or did I do it backwards?
Yes, you did.
So you can experience the divine without form, and that's what I experience when I'm just sitting and listening, or in those moments of are you, and then I also experience the divine with form, and the form that it's not a choice. It's the form that she comes to me in, or it comes to me as, is the Divine Mother. And I mean, my Hindu name, when I was initiated, my Hindu name is Kalidas, servant of Kali. And, but my focus is on her in Judaism, because people don't even know there is a Divine Mother. They do know, oftentimes in the Kabbalah, there's Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of God. But I go back way before the Kabbalah. I'm interested in Chachma, Lady Wisdom, Sophia in the Greek, wisdom with a capital W in English. And she is the first manifesting of the divine. So she's the active element of the divine happening, sort of like Shakti with Shiva. And so Shiva is still, and Shakti is dancing. So she's the dancing element. She's the manifesting element. So she's the wave, if you think of God as an ocean, she's the waving of the ocean. And I chant to her daily. I write about her and her teachings, I've written in 7 books, though only 2 of them speak to her directly, or 6 books, and there's 1 more. I've got a book. I don't know if it'll be a book or I'm just going to give it away on my website, but it's called The Gospel of Sophia. And there's a whole long backstory, but it's a collection of teachings of her by, verbalized by her in a number of different traditions. So she really is important to me. So I'm curious, since it sounds like we all come from some element of non-dualism, who your Ishwara is, who is it Jesus, for you, Rachel, or I'm just curious.
Well, for me, I also over the years have taken precepts for Buddhism. So I am Buddhist, follow the teachings of Buddha and Jesus, but I really follow Jesus's teachings. I try to stick to just the scripture. It's still, even as a pastor, it's very difficult to, like I said, I look at my congregation and I think, boy, what Jesus is saying is so different than the way everybody reacts and responds. And so, that's the challenge for me. But I personally, those are some of the things that or the people that the wisdom.
What about if you do visualize?
Yeah.
Do you visualize Christ? Do you visualize Mary?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm a work in progress, I guess. I don't. I see a lot of different things. For me, it's more of a light. My vision is a light or a prism. That's something that's come up for me. So in my light is just a bright yellow light that I see, usually coming from my third eye. So that for me is kind of what it is. I don't necessarily see faces. That's sort of the way I've always been.
I'm just curious.
General light. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My Ishta Devata is Durga, the mother. And so as an Ishta Devata, though, she's the chosen form, or, she chose me, that when I go into my concentration practices, or if I go into my Diksha practice, then that is typically where I go to. But in my heart, I recognize that divine consciousness is formless. And we choose the form that we're most comfortable in a moment. So if I'm chanting to Krishna or to Durga, or if I'm contemplating on Jesus Christ, which I do, Mother Mary, who I fell in love with as a child, whatever aspect it happens to be, the heart feeling is the same with each one. And then potentially it feels most healing when I just put away the description and simply, my own feeble attempt to just be. Yeah. How about you, Jyoti?
Yeah.
I think like Rachel, for me, ever since I was a child, has always been formless and light. But as a child too, I think that the manifestation I most related to was Mary, and very much so, just always praying to her. And my mother told me, because I've, as I think Swamini and Rachel knows too, Rabbi Rami, I've had lots of connections with I don't know, manifestations, forms, feelings, experiences. And so my mother told me one time that she came into my room when I was a child, and I was talking, and she asked me later who I was talking to, and I told her that I was talking to Mary. And I don't remember that particular conversation. I remember talking to like angels and stuff. But and now I find myself in the past few years that when I think when I'm seeking guidance, when I am looking for consolation, or to be consoled, I am looking. I think the motherly energy is what's being evoked. But in general, I think that being for me has no name and no form other than just like this sense of light, and that's been a continuity for me for my whole life. And I think that one of the things I find very interesting about some of the work that you do, Rabbi Rami, is that you really call to people to ask questions, and that when you ask questions, you invite them to listen to what their own inner answer is. Then they can read what you believe and what your response is through your own experience and studies, and then to almost debate that. And on your website, you're talking about how that's part of the path for Judaism. I know that it's also part of the Buddhist path as well, is to really kind of to question and to debate that. I feel so strongly. I do want to read like one of the questions that you have that relates to something you said earlier and your reply. And one of them you had was on your website: if God is reality, why do we submit to religious authorities and authoritarianism? And your reply is because we're ignorant of the truth that Alice is God, God is all. And imagine instead that God is someone and somewhere other than you and me here and now. Because we imagine God is someone else, we have to find a way to please God. And because we imagine that God is somewhere else, we have to imagine a path to God. Religious authorities offer us both and rely on authoritarianism to ensure that we don't question either. And that's the end of your quote. And I find that very fascinating, because as we're talking right now, like, what does God look like to each of us? How do we see it? It's still outside of ourselves. And one of your questions about this authority, and also in your, you ask questions of like, who is God and what is God? But that goes back to, I think, inviting a conversation to remember, as you're talking about this aliveness and this awareness. And I know we're running out of some time here, but I really appreciate the work that you do to remind all of us that God is not external, that we are not separate from this, as Muji would say, isness, right? That, that we are the four of us, and the plants behind me and the trees out near our yard and our neighbors and our dogs and cats. And I mean, there is no separation. And I think that one point on one of your inquiries that you have also, you talk about like the ocean, and I always think about how people say, how do you separate a drop from the ocean? Right. And I'm wondering if you can, close out this conversation tonight, talking a little bit about your experience with that, that aliveness, that isness, that God is not separate from us, but we are.
So the answer is no. I can't. Those moments, I mean, anything I say is wrong. Because so I'll just say it, but you have to know it's wrong up front. Those moments when I've experienced that isness, which is wrong, right? Because there's no I to experience it. So in those moments, whatever's happening, I'm just happening with. There's nothing to say. I can tell you what happens afterwards. Afterwards is love. But the experience itself, if you can even call it an experience, since there's no one to experience it, about the experience, I can say nothing. The aftermath is all about love. There's I think it's in the book of Exodus 32, maybe chapter 32, something where God passes by Moses, and Moses can't see God face to face in this chapter, but Moses sees the back of God. So the way I understand that, it's like a ship passing, and you didn't see the boat, but you know it was there because there's a wake. You can see the boat's wake. And in the Bible, there's 13 elements, according to the rabbinic interpretation. There's 13 elements in the divine wake. So there's the happening I can't say anything about, but the aftermath of the experience of that, I won't go into all 13, but it's all about knowing that I'm the divine and you're the divine, and nature is the divine, and leading you to compassion and justice and patience and all these things, forgiveness. So you can experience those things, and you do, which is why I think it's so important to have that other experience, right? The importance of spirituality / non-patriarchal religion or non-parochial religion is to have the experience of the aliveness, because everything good and decent comes out of that experience. And you don't need commandments and you don't need rules. Once that happens, it's just love, which sounds very vague, but we'll leave it at that. If I can, let me just raise one other thing, because I wanted to thank you, not just for having me on the show, but Jyoti, for what you just said about the questioning. Because it's a major part of Buddhism, and it's at the heart of Judaism. And I'm glad to hear that I do it in such a way that invites other people's inquiry and answers and doesn't shut them down. I have, so now I didn't intend this, but it'll look like I did. So I have this new show. Oh, really? Tell us about it.
Tell us about it.
So I have this new Zoom show on Monday nights from 7 to 8 Central Time. And what I do is I read one of the questions, because my work with Spirituality and Health magazine is primarily Q&A. I run the spiritual Dear Abby column. So people write letters, send me emails about spiritual questions, and then I respond as best I can in 35 to 50 words. They're short answers. So what I do on the show is I take one of the questions and I put it out to the people who come on. There's like 25 people maybe. And I put the question out in the chat box so everyone can read it. And then I say, okay, so if you had to respond, what's your response? And the show just started. Each week is different, but we've only done 1 week of this. And it's fascinating to hear what people have to say. And of course, they're all wrong, because I'm going to tell them what the true answer is. But it's so interesting how the question sparks so many responses, and then the responses solicit other questions among the people who are, listening. If anyone who hears this wants to come on the show, wants to join us, there's no price. You can go to my website, which is oneriverfoundation.org. One River Foundation, spell it all out, O-N-E, oneriverfoundation.org, and you can look for, I think it's, I'm not the host, but I think it's called Roadside Assistance at the corner of Tohu Vavohu, and that's Hebrew for madness and chaos.
That's great.
Nice. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are so grateful. This was such an amazing, fun conversation. And for those of you that are watching and listening, you can join Rabbi Rami on this quest for finding answers, also by visiting his website, rabbirami.com. And you can also listen to his podcast, Essential Conversations with Rabbi Rami, and that is at spiritualhealth.com. He has a whole lot of books, and those are available at your local bookstore and on Amazon.com as well.
Thank you all for joining us for this amazing conversation. Rabbi Rami brought such authentic and sincere discussion to our table. I can only imagine how the listeners must be feeling. Can you sense the change that is happening, the shift in spirituality, religion, and society? Has today's program inspired you to be just a little bit more aware about where you intend to bring your practice, if in fact you're looking for a new church or an alternate teaching? Or perhaps today's show has illustrated the powerfulness and the symbology of the current movement of people looking for a sacred space where they belong. It is helpful to remember spirituality is a journey, and that journey is a little bit different for each of us. So let's not judge the journey of others. Instead, we can hold the highest intention of understanding, empathy, and unity, no matter what labels we apply. Thank you for joining us on the Church of Love. Remember, you are love and you are loved. Be well, everyone.